I never imagined I'd be writing one of these posts, but here I am. The past few months have been a whirlwind, and I'm hoping that sharing my experience might resonate with someone in a similar situation, or at least offer a bit of drama for those reading along. Buckle up, it's quite the story. My name is Jake, I'm 38 years old, and I've been married to Sarah, 36, for 12 years. We have two wonderful kids, Emma, who's 10, and Liam, who's 8. Until recently, I believed our marriage was solid. Sure, we had our share of disagreements, but I genuinely thought we were happy and committed to one another. I run a thriving construction business that I built from scratch. It's taken years of effort, but it's given us a comfortable life in a lovely suburban home. Sarah works part-time as a real estate agent, which allows her flexibility to handle most of the daily parenting tasks. I thought we had a good system. I provided financial security, and she managed the home front. Looking back now, there were signs I missed. Sarah had been distant for months, often irritable and constantly on her phone. She'd quickly put it away if I entered the room, which felt odd. Intimacy had become rare, and when I tried to initiate, she'd brush me off with reasons like being too tired or stressed. At the time, I chalked it up to a rough patch. Maybe she was going through hormonal changes or just needed some space. I stayed patient, hoping things would eventually improve. Then, the bomb dropped. Out of nowhere, Sarah announced she was going on a week-long trip to Hawaii with some friends from her yoga class. She hadn't mentioned any plans before, so her sudden announcement caught me off guard. When I asked about it, she got defensive, accusing me of being controlling. "I'm allowed to have a life outside of being a wife and mother, Jake," she snapped. "I need this trip to relax and recharge. You should be supportive instead of making me feel guilty." Not wanting to escalate things, I backed off. Still, something about the situation didn't sit right. Sarah wasn't the type to plan lavish getaways, especially without the family. A week in Hawaii seemed over the top for a group of suburban moms. Despite my unease, I convinced myself I was overthinking it. Sarah deserved a break, and I wanted to trust her. I even helped her pack, drove her to the airport, and wished her a great trip. The kids and I waved goodbye as she went through security. She barely glanced back, and as soon as she disappeared from view, an uneasy feeling settled in my chest. Call it intuition or just years of knowing my wife, but I sensed something was wrong. On the drive home, I replayed all the little oddities I'd noticed in recent months. The secretive phone use, the excuses to avoid closeness, the sudden interest in fitness and revealing outfits, and the frequent girls' nights that seemed to be increasing. By the time I got home, I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. The next day, while the kids were at school, I decided to dig deeper. I logged into our shared cell phone account and accessed the detailed logs for the past few months. What I found shattered me. There were countless calls and texts to an unfamiliar number, many during times she claimed to be at yoga or running errands. Some were late at night, long after I'd gone to bed. My hands shook as I performed a reverse lookup on the number. It belonged to Brad Thompson, a personal trainer at Sarah's gym. A quick search on social media revealed he was in his mid-30s, in incredible shape, and had the kind of looks that could easily turn heads. Everything about him was the polar opposite of me, with my dad bod and work-worn hands. I stared at his picture, my stomach churning. How long had this been happening? How could Sarah betray me and our family like this? Part of me wanted to confront her immediately, to call and demand answers. But the logical side of me knew I needed irrefutable evidence before taking action. So, I pushed down my anger and pain and began to plan my next steps. While keeping life as normal as possible for the kids, I launched a deeper investigation. I hired a private investigator to dig into Brad's background and track his activities. I combed through our joint bank and credit card statements, uncovering multiple questionable transactions at high-end restaurants and luxury hotels. The definitive proof came when I accessed Sarah's iCloud backup. There it was, hundreds of explicit messages and photos exchanged between her and Brad over the past 6 months. My wife of 12 years, the woman I thought I knew, had been living a double life. The betrayal hit me like a freight train, leaving me heartbroken and seething with a kind of fury I'd never felt before. Sarah hadn't just deceived me. She had shattered our entire family. To make matters worse, she was now enjoying a Hawaiian getaway, likely with Brad, funded by my hard work. If she was determined to destroy our marriage, I was just as determined to make her face the fallout. I spent the next few days in overdrive. I hired the most experienced divorce attorney in town and handed over all the evidence I had gathered of Sarah's affair. I discreetly transferred half of our shared savings into a separate account and meticulously documented everything: our children's school and medical records, as well as my involvement in their daily routines. Finally, I booked a plane ticket to Hawaii. I told the kids I had an urgent business trip and arranged for my parents to look after them for a few days. It tore me apart to lie, but I wanted everything lined up before breaking the news. The flight to Hawaii was agonizing. A small part of me still clung to the hope that this was all some massive misunderstanding, that I'd find Sarah alone on the beach and we'd somehow reconcile. But deep down, I already knew the truth. Using information from our credit card records, I tracked down the name of the resort where Sarah was staying. When I arrived, I approached the front desk with a confident smile, claiming I wanted to surprise my wife for our anniversary. "I'm sorry, sir, but Miss Thompson checked out earlier this morning," the receptionist informed me. My heart stopped. Thompson? She was using his name. Did she leave a forwarding address? I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. The clerk hesitated, sensing something was wrong. "I'm afraid we can't share that information," she replied cautiously. I nodded stiffly, thanked her, and walked out onto the beach feeling a mix of anger and defeat. Had I traveled all this way for nothing? Then, out of the corner of my eye, I spotted someone familiar strolling along the shore. It was Brad, looking smug, tanned, and fit in his swim trunks. My blood boiled. Without thinking, I marched straight toward him. "Where is she?" I demanded, my voice sharp with anger. Brad froze, his face shifting from shock to unease. "Jake, man, what are you doing here? Where is my wife?" I growled, stepping closer. He raised his hands defensively. "Look, calm down. Sarah's fine. She's right." "Here," came a voice behind me. I turned to see Sarah standing there, looking radiant in a bikini, her face a mix of shock and guilt. For a moment, the three of us were silent, the tension thick in the air. Finally, Sarah broke the silence. "Jake, I can explain." I cut her off, my voice cold. "Don't bother," reaching into my bag. I pulled out a manila envelope and thrust it into her hands. "Happy anniversary, sweetheart. Here's your gift. Divorce papers." Her expression crumbled as she flipped through the documents, tears welling up in her eyes. "Jake, please, can we talk about this?" I let out a bitter laugh. "Now you want to talk? Where was this urge when you were sneaking around with your little gym buddy for months?" Brad tried to jump in. "Look, man, this isn't what you think." I whipped around, glaring at him. "Shut your mouth. You wanted her? Congratulations. She's yours. I hope you're ready to step up and be a father, because that's part of the deal." Sarah's face was streaked with tears now, her voice trembling. "Jake, what about the kids? Please, think about them." I stared at her coldly. "Oh, don't worry, I've already handled it. I'm filing for full custody. You can have supervised visits if you can pull yourself away from him long enough to remember you're a mother." Her sobs grew louder, attracting stares from people nearby. A pang of sympathy flickered, but I quickly snuffed it out. She made her bed. Now she could lie in it. As I turned to leave, Sarah grabbed my arm. "Please, Jake, don't do this. We can fix it. Let's go to counseling, figure things out." I shook her hand off without hesitation. "You should have thought about that before throwing away 12 years of marriage. Enjoy the rest of your vacation. I'll see you in court." With that, I walked down the beach, leaving Sarah crying in Brad's arms. My job was done. I'd served the papers and said my piece. Now, it was time to head home and focus on the people who truly mattered, my kids. The flight home was a blur. My emotions swung between empowerment and heartbreak. But I reminded myself of what was most important, being there for Emma and Liam as their world shifted. They needed me now more than ever. Once I was back, I sat them down for a difficult conversation. I explained, in terms they could understand, that Mommy and Daddy wouldn't be living together anymore. I told them their mom had made choices that hurt our family, but reassured them that we both loved them deeply. There were tears, confusion, and endless questions, but I promised them I'd do everything I could to keep their lives as stable as possible. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. When Sarah returned, she alternated between begging me to reconsider and lashing out in anger. She accused me of overreacting and ruining the family over what she called one mistake. During one argument, I scoffed. "One mistake? You carried on an affair for months, Sarah. You lied to my face every single day. You used our money to fund your escapades. You even took our kids on playdates with this guy's children while sneaking around behind my back. That's not a mistake. That's a deliberate betrayal." Her face crumpled, tears flowing again. "I never meant to hurt you, Jake. I felt ignored and unappreciated. Brad made me feel alive again." I laughed sharply. "Oh, spare me the excuses. If you were unhappy, you could have said something. We could have gone to counseling, worked through it. Instead, you chose to blow up everything we built. As the divorce proceedings began, things got ugly. Sarah tried to paint me as a distant workaholic who neglected her and the kids. But I came prepared. I documented my active role in our children's lives, coaching soccer, attending recitals, handling sick days, and more. I also reminded the court that my hard work had funded the comfortable life Sarah had enjoyed. My lawyer was relentless, using the evidence of her affair and her decision to use Brad's last name in Hawaii as proof of her lack of commitment. We highlighted her recklessness and questionable judgment, showing she wasn't fit for full custody. To my surprise, Brad dumped Sarah only weeks into the divorce. Apparently, he wasn't interested in playing stepdad or dealing with the chaos she created. Sarah was devastated, realizing too late she destroyed her marriage for a fling that wouldn't last. Her behavior spiraled. She missed court dates and visitations, lashed out at me and the kids, and seemed increasingly unstable. Meanwhile, I focused on maintaining stability for Emma and Liam. When our court date arrived, the judge reviewed the evidence and testimony before delivering the verdict. I was granted full physical custody of the kids, while Sarah was given limited, supervised visitation. She was also ordered to pay child support, given her part-time job as a real estate agent. As we exited the courthouse, Sarah grabbed my arm. Her eyes were red and pleading. "How could you do this to me, Jake?" She glared at me, her voice low and sharp. "I'm their mother. I met her gaze without flinching. You made your choices, Sarah. Actions have consequences. Maybe one day, you'll step up and become the mother our kids deserve. Until then, I'll be here picking up the pieces you left behind." In the months that followed, I focused on rebuilding. The kids and I started attending family therapy to help us process everything. I threw myself into being the best dad I could be, creating a stable and loving home for Emma and Liam. Gradually, we found our rhythm again: game nights, movie marathons, weekend adventures. Those moments became our new normal. I also started dating again, but I was cautious, always putting my children's needs first. Meanwhile, Sarah's life unraveled. She lost her job, started drinking heavily, and her behavior grew more erratic. Her visits with the kids became increasingly uncomfortable, leaving them anxious and me heartbroken. But my priority was clear: protecting Emma and Liam. Now, let's talk about Jake for a moment. This guy is a definition of unshakable. When I started reading, I half expected another sob story about a husband begging his unfaithful wife to stay. But no, Jake flipped the script so hard it left Sarah spinning. That scene on the beach? Iconic. When he handed her those divorce papers, I could practically hear the mic drop. And Brad? That guy must have been questioning every decision that led him to that beach. Jake handled it all with class and composure, which is more than I can say for most people in his position. But what really stood out was Jake's commitment to his kids. He didn't let his pain cloud his judgment or create a toxic environment. He knew divorce, though painful, was better than staying in a broken marriage. That's what makes him a real father, putting his kids above everything else. Now, Sarah, where do I even begin? She had everything: a devoted husband, amazing kids, a comfortable life. And she threw it all away for a guy with abs and probably zero substance. It's baffling. And her attempt to play the victim? Please, if your marriage isn't working, you sit down and communicate. You don't blow up your family for a fleeting fling. The karma in this story is absolute perfection. Sarah thought she could trade up, but instead, she lost everything: her marriage, her family, her job. And Brad? He bolted the moment things got real. Turns out, being a stepdad wasn't on his bucket list. A Reddit user chimed in with a similar story. This hit home for me. My buddy Mike went through something like this. His wife of 10 years cheated with her boss. Mike found out after seeing texts on her phone while she was showering. Unlike Jake, Mike confronted her immediately and it blew up. She denied it, then blamed him for being neglectful. It was a disaster. Their divorce dragged on for over a year. Mike struggled. He started drinking and had trouble keeping up with work. But eventually, he got his act together for his kids. Reading Jake's story, I couldn't help but think how much smoother things could have gone for Mike if he'd stayed calm and planned like Jake. Gathering evidence, keeping emotions in check, it's brilliant. Jake's story is a reminder that even when life knocks you down, you can rise again if you keep your head straight. Mike eventually found his footing, too. These stories show that no matter how hard it gets, you can rebuild and come out stronger.